We must never stop using our art to help people, to bring people together.
In the world of classical music, there are few conductors who are as well regarded as Zubin Mehta. He has led the world's best orchestras, but he's most closely identified with this group, the Israel Philharmonic.
We play our concerts. We're not going there with an Israeli flag and just talking about it. There's no propaganda going on.
Music is his diplomacy, and he isn't shy about his efforts, starting with his own ensemble.
It is my dream that an Israeli Arab will sit amongst Israeli Jews and make music.
All kinds of music, even Wagner, Adolf Hitler's favorite German composer.
There are still quite a few people with tattooed numbers on their arms. And it's not that they hate the music of Wagner, but music transports them back to the time of terror. And we want to avoid that.
I spoke to Mehta in New York.
Zubin Mehta, welcome to Talk to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
You grew up in Bombay. You're now perhaps the most famous orchestra conductor in the world. You've won every possible honor. Did you ever think along the way that you would have this career in this life?
Not in my wildest dreams. But it's not as exaggerated as you just put it. Because I'm just a musician carrying his craft all over the world.
How does it feel for you, Zubin Mehta, to be a representative of Israel all around the world?
Well, this orchestra is really the positive face of what the world views Israel today. We're not on the first page, we're on page 56. And I wish that all of Israel would be on page 56. In other words, that Israel to the world would be the arts and sciences. Because that's what excels in Israel beyond anything else.
But you said in the past that the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra is essentially, it is Israel when it travels around the world. What do you mean?
Well, we carry a positive message. We play our concerts. We're not going there with an Israeli flag and just talking about it. There's no propaganda going on. We play European music. In Carnegie Hall, we started the concert with a little Israeli piece, but then we played Brahms and Tchaikovsky. The rest of the tour, we're playing Bruckner's 8th Symphony. In other words, if we just went and played only Israeli music and only Israeli soloists, it would be different. But we don't do that. We are a world-class orchestra. We go on the tour as a world-class orchestra, and we make music.
And yet there are a lot of people around the world who see the orchestra as an extension of the state of Israel. There have been boycotts, there have been efforts to disrupt some of the performances.
But very few times, I must say. There was only one case in London 2 years ago where they tried to interrupt a concert. But this has never happened before. That was the only time. And I kept on playing the piece, and the audience, there were 6,000 of them in London at the prom concerts. And they were completely on our side. And I'm sure many of them sympathized with those who stood with the banner saying, "Free Palestine." I'm sure. But they didn't want to be disturbed at the concert.
There have also, though, been boycotts of Israeli products. But what do you make of these passions, particularly as they are trying to target what you're trying to do?
Well, we are not really targeted at all. So we just carry on our... You know, I'll tell you an example. In 1972, when this incredible tragedy struck the Israeli Olympic team in Munich, we were in Sao Paulo on a tour. It happened to be that that day was the National Day of Brazil. Well, the orchestra, hearing the news of people killed in Munich, that night we played Mahler's First Symphony like our life depended on it. The symphony ends with a great musical victory, and they played that victory that night. So, you know, that was an example of extreme tragedy thousands of miles away, and we showed that this spirit goes on, and we are not disturbed by it on stage, and we show what we can do under those circumstances.
You've had this affinity, this association with Israel for more than 50 years.
They adopted me, I adopted them. I'm a great friend of the country. I may not agree with everything that's going on, but I'm a great friend of Israel. And this orchestra has become my family. You know, it was founded in '36. It's a young orchestra. The great Polish violinist Huberman, who founded the orchestra from exiles from Europe, already in those days Palestine. It was a British mandate. He convinced hundreds of people and families to come to Palestine and the orchestra was called the Palestine Symphony Orchestra. And they went to Egypt to perform with their guest conductors. So I inherited that orchestra almost in 1961. It was an orchestra of the Austrian Empire, let's say. There were Austrians, Poles, Hungarians, Czech, etc. Then they retired, and in the 70s and 80s came the emigration from the Soviet Union. And this was an incredible cultural injection in our orchestra. Now, we didn't engage them just because they came from Moscow. They had to pass a very difficult audition. And we didn't know who they were because they are behind a curtain.
And you still do that to this day? You
Yes.
do auditions behind the
So
curtain?
every ex-Soviet musician that plays in the orchestra has won an audition against 20 or 25 people, even other Russians.
You've spent a lot of time promoting music education for the Palestinians. Will there come a day when one of these students is able to sit behind the curtain and successfully audition and become part of the orchestra?
Well, it's my dream. It is my dream that an Israeli Arab will sit amongst Israeli Jews and make music. And it's not going to be far, because I have a program in the north of Israel, in the cities of Shfaram and Nazareth, where we have over 250 young kids studying classical music, primarily with their teachers, but supervised by members of the Israel Philharmonic. And we have wonderful charitable donors who support this program. And in the Tel Aviv University, there's a Buchman School of Music where we teach Israelis and foreign students the art of playing in orchestras. We already have 7 or 8 Arab students from the north who are high enough technically to be in that school. So 7 or 8 kids have now come from the north to Tel Aviv, studying there. And sometimes we take 1 or 2 of them in the orchestra as substitutes. So the process is working. And one of these days, we'll shift the curtain. Surprise, there'll be an Arab.
And what will that feel like, both to you and to the orchestra?
The orchestra has no problems with that. We have Arab soloists playing with the orchestra. There are over 1 million Israeli Arabs, as Israelis, living within today's boundaries of Israel. And they should be included as one of us.
You sympathize with the Palestinians and are opposed to these settlements.
I'm opposed to the settlements. I don't want to make a big discussion out of it. I'm just telling you, I think settlements to the future of both Palestine and Israel are counterproductive. But this is for not only this government of Israel, but the people who are pushing them from outside to negotiate as soon as possible.
And you've also said the Palestinians also bear some responsibility in terms of, because there have been attacks not on the settlements, but on Israel proper.
Well, there are fanatics on both sides. I would not say a majority at all. There's a minority in Israel, and on the other side too, that want the status quo to continue. Those people have to be convinced or just not paid attention to, and people who are negotiating should just go on in a positive direction.
Is there something called music diplomacy that can work? In other words, if the Israeli orchestra is integrated and has an Israeli Arab playing for it, do you think that can set some sort of tone for...
Well, our music diplomacy doesn't stop. Every concert, there's somebody sitting in the audience and says, what? Really? We didn't know that there's such a high cultural level in Israel, etc. Because all they read is the front page.
You're watching Talk to Al Jazeera. More with Zubin Mehta ahead.
Only on Al Jazeera America.
I lived that character.
Go one-on-one with America's movers and shakers.
We will be able to see change.
Gripping, inspiring, entertaining. No topic off limits.
And I'm like, Dad, there are hookers in this house.
Exclusive conversations you won't find anywhere else.
These are very vivid human stories. If you have an agenda with people, you sometimes don't see the truth.
To watch new episodes of Talk to Al Jazeera, check your local listings or visit aljazeera.com.
You're watching Talk to Al Jazeera. Our guest today is world-renowned orchestra conductor Zubin Mehta. As a conductor, you are collaborating with world-class musicians. People who are unfamiliar with the music world, explain your role.
Well, a lot is communication. I have the good fortune at this point in my life to make music with soloists that I know for years and years, or young soloists that I have auditioned and I choose to introduce. With both, I work privately before the rehearsals and see what they have to say, how much I have to be flexible, and flexibility, musically speaking, is very important. For the soloist to be flexible, but mostly for myself. So I have to be flexible. But, you know, we are both free thinking, we fly in space together. And it's not as complicated as it sounds.
There are some music critics who have suggested that with some conductors, not necessarily including you, but some conductors, that the dramatic arm movements, according to these critics, says more about the conductor's ego than necessarily their responsibilities.
Well, that's in their own minds. They should listen to the music and stop watching.
Have there been any...
Music is what you hear, not what you see.
With the Israeli Philharmonic, there's also a special, I suppose, sensitivity because many Holocaust survivors recoil at the idea of playing Wagner, which was a favorite of the Nazis. You tried in the past with good intentions to try to get the Israeli Philharmonic to play it. It didn't work out. You didn't play it. Would you ever try again?
We will, but we have to have patience. I hope it happens in my lifetime. I hope. But there are still quite a few people with tattooed numbers on their arms. They are revered saints in Israel. We have to respect them. And it's not that they hate the music of Wagner, but music transports them back to the time of terror. And we want to avoid that.
Is there one moment in your career that stands out as being the most awestruck with something that you saw in front of you or something that you witnessed?
Well, I'm a musician, as I said. It's the music that makes me awestruck. It's the interpretation of some of my colleagues. But if you talk about an occasion, this orchestra has had many occasions which go down in their history as being very vitally significant. The first time we played in Berlin after the war, 1971. And Germans were really with tears in their eyes, especially at the end of the concert when we played the Israeli anthem.
And what was that like for you and for the members of the orchestra?
Well, I was, you know, I'm neither Jewish nor Israeli nor German. I was proud and honored to be part of this. Daniel Barenboim was our soloist in that concert. And it was an occasion that nobody will forget. Another occasion was in 1982. We went across the border into Lebanon. In those days, there was this war between the southern Lebanese army and the north and Fatah, etc. And the Israelis had erected a good fence where doctors were treating wounded Lebanese. Right, they're doing that now with Syrians also. Israeli doctors are helping out on the border. And we went across this border into southern Lebanon, into a tobacco field, with the help of the Israeli border police, who erected a stage and a sunshade for the orchestra. And we played a concert where only southern Lebanese came to this concert. And after the concert, which lasted about an hour and 20 minutes, they rushed to the stage, they climbed on the stage, they were hugging the musicians. This is the Lebanon in Israel I would like to see today. Unfortunately, then in 1983 came the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. for which the southern Lebanese were very grateful in the beginning. I think the Israelis stayed too long, and the same southern Lebanese turned to be the first suicide bombers, if you can imagine. This is how history turns, through, forgive my saying so, mistakes of leaders.
The relationship with Israel you've described as a marriage. It's going on now 50 years, starting in the 1960s. In 1967, you went to Israel to show solidarity during the Six-Day War. Marriage has its ups and downs.
Ups and downs with Israelis is a matter of daily discussion. Yeah, we are a family. We are a family that, since we are a cooperative orchestra, we don't have a board of directors that raises money. It's a cooperative orchestra that decides economic policy and musical policy. Economic policy by themselves, musical policy with me as their advisor.
In addition to Israel, you've also had relationships with the New York Philharmonic. You're a conductor here in New York for 13 years, the longest in this orchestra's history. You've also been associated, as you mentioned, with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Berlin Philharmonic. You have very long relationships with them in a field that sometimes is notorious for conductors and musicians hopping around and moving around. What's been different?
I've never hopped around. When I was in Los Angeles for 16 years, I always had the Israel Philharmonic. And that's where I would, pendulate. But with the Berlin and Vienna Philharmonics, I've never been music director. But I've conducted them every single season since 1961. And I've passed my 50-year mark with both orchestras, as with the Israelis too.
You've also conducted and led orchestras in Sarajevo, also in Kashmir. There's something about you and conflict that seems to sort of draw each other. What is that?
Well, we must never stop using our art to help people, to bring people together. In Sarajevo, it was in the war, 94, the war had not, the Bosnian War was still going on. And we played a concert in a bombed courtyard of an Islamic library. One of the first things that the Serbs bombed was the House of Books. So we played in that courtyard, and because of the rubble around us, no public could be allowed. So it was only for television. But we did the rehearsals in the non-bombed theater, where 3 or 4 times it was a full, and the Sarajevo public came to listen to us rehearsing. In Kashmir, it was my lifelong dream to have Muslims and Hindus in my country sit together and listen to music. Now, I didn't change the history of Kashmir from the end of that concert, but they sat together and they heard Beethoven and Tchaikovsky, and I think they went away with a smile on their face. There was some remnant of peace in their hearts, I'm sure.
India is very important to you. You grew up in Bombay. I wonder if you can briefly describe your path from India to Israel. And I know it's a very long story. But
No, I'm still an Indian with my passport. I studied for 7 years in Vienna. And I got a call from the Israel Philharmonic that a very venerable conductor, Eugene Ormandy, was ill, and they had nobody. And they had heard of me because I had just conducted in Philadelphia. It was in '61. And I went there. Now, it's very important to note that every conductor gets a first chance because of these older conductors falling sick. But then they they invited me the second time. That's important. Because if I went there to help them out and nothing musically important happened between us, they would have said thank you very much, and I would never see them again. But they invited me the second time, and then the third time, etc., etc. Therefore started this incredible friendship with me and the Israel Philharmonic and Israel.
And in 1981, they made you conductor for life.
Well, that's an honor. It's not a contract.
But what did it feel like? It must, I mean...
Well, it's, any conductor given that honor is something that you just dream of. It doesn't come every day.
Why did you become a conductor? Why not play an instrument or
always wanted to be. My father founded the Bombay Symphony Orchestra, and when he came back from America, he continued as a soloist and conductor, and I would prepare the music parts for him. I would put the music on the stands. I was his assistant, and I just always wanted to be associated with that orchestra. And then, of course, through his love of symphonic music, which he brought and imbibed in me, that's the music and that's the life I always wanted to have.
You're 78 years old. How long do you want to keep doing this? And what do you think your legacy, what do you want your legacy to be? When
I'm not going to die in a sanatorium. That I promise you.
Do you want to die in front of an orchestra?
Why not?
If somebody had to describe your legacy and you could write it, what would it be?
That I tried to be as honest a musician, that I tried with the music to bring people together, and that I spent as much time with my family as I possibly could, which was never enough.
Coming up on Talk to Al Jazeera, what does Zubin Mehta, the internationally acclaimed orchestra conductor, think of contests like American Idol? We'll ask him just ahead.
Protesters are gathering
There's an
again.
air of tension right now.
Chanting for democracy.
This is another significant development.
We have an exclusive story tonight, and we go live to...
You're watching Talk to Al Jazeera, and our guest today is world-renowned orchestra conductor Zubin Mehta. I understand that you are a fan of the late Freddie Mercury from the rock and roll group Queen, although you don't necessarily like rock and roll music. Can you explain that?
I was not really a fan, but in his obituary, I read that he was a Parsi, like me. You know, I come from a very tiny minority in India, and he was one of us. But Freddie Mercury didn't tell me that. When I read his obituary, his real name was printed there, Balsara. It's a very common Parsi name. And since then, I've been watching him on MTV. He's a great performer. I'm not at home with his music, which is not also a criticism. It's just not my stuff. But he's a really great performer. And I'm sorry I didn't meet him.
Rock and roll you've described as predictable. But what do you make of how popular it is and the effect it has on pop culture?
Well, it has had a pretty long life. When it first started, some of us didn't think it would last, but it has lasted. But recently in New York, I went to a theater where I saw a musical dedicated 90 minutes to jazz. Now, jazz is a style which has been dying out. And people like Wynton Marsalis has rejuvenated this old style. And I heard 90 minutes of jazz, I was in heaven. Because that's the music, the pop music I grew up with. You know, when I was a student in Vienna, I would go to concerts of Louis Armstrong and Sidney Bechet and Duke Ellington, etc. And suddenly, my youth came back to me with this marvelous performance of Wynton's band on stage and excellent singers and tap dancing. So, in other words, I'm not foreign to all that world.
Do you ever watch music contest shows like American Idol here in the United States or the contest shows?
No, I'm doing concerts when those shows go on. But I don't watch television in the evenings.
Is there, but the concept of amateur musicians getting up in front of millions of people and maybe they have a hidden talent and that coming out, is there anything about that?
I can tell you one thing. If I would send on one of these shows a talented American, German, or Israeli violinist or pianist, they would wipe all of them out. There's such talent. And I'm talking about teenage classical musicians who are superb. They should be able to compete too. But I don't think the judges can judge them. They don't have the education for it. Now, I've insulted all of them. I may be wrong.
That's okay. Harry Connick Jr. and Keith Urban.
I don't know them.
Yeah. Is there and finally, you mentioned you're traveling a lot. You don't get a chance to watch TV. How do you decompress after your concerts, after your tours?
I play backgammon with my wife. I go to Indian restaurants. In every city where I'm at home in, I know exactly which restaurant to go to. They know exactly what food I like. I've got it pretty well settled everywhere.
And any food secrets that Zubin Mehta can share with us? That
I don't like Japanese food. There you are.
Okay, I'm sure they're still going to invite you for the next tour anyway. Zubin Mehta, it's a pleasure and an honor to have talked to you. Thank you so much for being on Talk to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.